What kind of businesswoman do you want to be?
Approachable.
Okay. Okay.
Present. Active listener.
Okay.
I own a mental health clinic. So my team are licensed counselors. Some of them are in the pre-license phase where they're working towards licensure. Taking care of them is top priority because they have a really hard job of working in the counseling field. And being that I am not from the mental health industry, you know, there's a huge learning curve for me. But it's by design that I'm not a counselor, so that I can take off the burden of the business things off of them. But still understanding their role and where they're coming from and what their needs are.
So kind of like helping the counselor so that more people can be helped. And then we also want to make a profit, right? Like
Exactly.
It is a business.
Exactly.
You have to pay them, pay yourself.
And with every increase that we have, whether it's a negotiation with an insurance company on the reimbursement rate, or it's obtaining more clients, that volume ultimately helps the therapist. So we need to be operational and responsible with our finances in order to take care of the therapist so that we're meeting their needs and their goals, income, not just income, but just the team culture, all those things. So those play a role. So it's balancing, you know, that like lead generation, which sounds so businessy in a human experience in a human experience industry where it's not just about lead generation, you know, but we have to use those words in order to be functional. And being functional allows me to then increase pay and do things, holiday parties, you know, do things that everybody wants to have. Those things don't just come out of nowhere. So finding that balance.
How long have you been in business?
1 year.
Okay.
We just celebrated our 1 year anniversary.
So you're doing great. So what actions do you need to take for that personal vision in the next year?
Organizing finances and staying accountable to billing. Because at the end of the day, when all of those billing things are in line and operating as they should, then that gives me a better view of where our finances are in order to offer pay raises and offer things with proper knowledge behind it, not just be like, oh yes, you are working hard, I recognize you, because I want to be that pleaser as well. But it has to have validation. And
so personally, in your journey of choosing to be an entrepreneur and then wanting to be this beautiful utopia of a leader, right? But then you have these real life organizations, accountability, you know, we have to be profitable. What are some of your personal struggles or growths that you're working on there?
Being a new business owner, you know, when we opened a year ago, I was brand new business owner, so trusting myself.
Ooh, okay.
With decisions.
We actually have enough here to go to the thought map, because what we do here is, you know, we identify a barrier and then we map it out and we kind of go deep as to, and that allows you to kind of make some decisions that, or at least be more confident in the decisions that you know you have to make. So if you were to maybe give one thought, emotion to this kind of barrier in yourself, what word would you give it? I think frustration is a safe thing to map, right? Because we all have frustration. So what makes you frustrated now? Put that there. Other departments? Okay. Now, in those other departments, what is it frustrating about? Not like the details of, the billing, but why is it so frustrating?
Lack of communication is one.
What else?
Speed or lack thereof. Also my lack of experience in this world and definitions or not understanding how things work. So my own learning curve.
Yep. You know, it's really frustrating to pay somebody to do something, but you don't really know how to do it, so you don't even know if they're doing it correctly.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
What else about having to give tasks to someone else?
Making sure that they have capacity for it, time and energy.
Okay.
So not wanting to put something on someone else if they already have a lot on their plate.
Right, right. So let's just say, well, if they have capacity. But also the word I'm thinking, and if it doesn't pertain to you, then, but like a lack of control.
Totally.
What else in your life right now kind of causes some frustration?
It's all related. Financials.
Okay. Oh, money's always. So what specifically about money?
Taking a huge risk. Being responsible for other people.
Ooh, that's huge. It's one thing to be responsible for your own paycheck, but to be responsible for someone else's is. Could you say that there's like some anxiety here? And probably here too, so we could do like frustrated and anxiety?
Sure.
Yeah. What about in your past? Not way back into childhood yet, but like, you know, in your young adult years, what kind of things caused you anxiety or frustration?
Being understood.
Ooh, okay. Is there a time in your life that it had a significant impact on you when somebody didn't understand you?
Previous jobs.
Okay. You know, when you were misunderstood at work, how did you?
Underappreciated.
I'm just going to say it.
Or feeling like what you're doing is not good enough.
Ooh.
Or expectations.
When you're in that environment, because you are doing everything in your power to make sure that you don't create that environment, right? Because we talked about that in the personal vision. So how did that make you feel about yourself?
Frustrated, overworking, difficulty creating boundaries, because I want to hit those goals, and then you do, and it keeps changing. Then you're constantly achieving.
So you are a goal-oriented person, right? We talked about being a type A, right? And when you can't reach that goal, how do you feel?
Tired.
Okay.
So the question was, when I do reach a goal, how do I feel, or when I don't?
Yeah, I'm actually trying to scratch pretty deep of like, and let's go to your childhood.
Okay.
Tell me the first time you felt anxious or frustrated as a child.
Schedule and rushing.
Okay. And who was putting that schedule on you?
Myself as I got older.
Yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what causes anxiety? And I'm guessing it's around performance. But that's a guess. Like, what would you say that anxiety as a child of the schedule, and it could be some of these things, lack of boundaries, not appreciated, not good enough, expectations always changing. I mean, was it similar? So I was
high performing in school.
Okay. And what about at home?
I think so. I think, my parents always had good things to say about me. But maybe the time wasn't always there, working parents and oldest of 3 kids, then 4 later.
Yep.
So maybe learning to slow down and having that individualized time or quiet time wasn't prioritized. So pace maybe was modeled.
Yes, this kind of anxiety around performance was modeled. And so how did that make you feel?
Anxious. Maybe striving for attention.
Mm-hmm. And attention came with performance, right? I'm assuming?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Or needing to make sure everybody else was okay.
Mm-hmm. So you were a caretaker
Yes.
even back then?
Yes.
Yeah. What, you're a mom?
Yes.
And you have a good relationship with your mom?
Yes.
And sometimes when we get to that place in our life, we don't want to say anything negative about our parents because we know they did the best that they could because,
totally.
you know, we're parents now and we know, you know, how hard it is and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But just as you're learning about, you know, psychology, and how do you think this, starting in that kind of high performing, you know, attention is around performance, still impacts you today?
What motivates me at work and at home. And then also trying not to project that same pace onto my own kids.
Right.
Even giving them opportunities. But being more aware of that.
So there's also some anxiety around being a good mom, right?
Sure.
I think every mother has that, right?
Yes.
So okay, so we were at kind of anxiety and frustration all the way to kind of your childhood and being a high performer from probably birth, you know, and being the firstborn. The last question that I ask in Thought Map is, how does this impact your relationship with God? And if you don't believe in a God, just, you know, creator, universe, however you define that. Okay.
Yes.
So how does this impact your relationship with God? All of this?
Not prioritizing quiet prayer.
Okay. So do you feel like if you did something specific, you would have less anxiety, like in your relationship with God, or?
No, I think that so many other things just cloud time and
so it takes
presence of mind that I don't prioritize spirituality
away from God. Okay. And how does that make you feel?
Not guilty. Like, I don't think that that's like a check mark that I need to have or like a validation that I need to have. It's just maybe that goes to mindfulness. Like, maybe this is not.
And the self-help industry is all over kind of positive psychology, right? But one of the things that's missing is this organization, because we really should be doing different things for the different things that are going on in our mind. So these are the 10 categories that I came up with over time of just taking care of myself. And so what we do here is we kind of identify what are some of the core things. So for example, being a high achiever and performer, it is a choice. It's not something you necessarily want to give up, right? You like being that person. So, because sometimes when you're going through these things, you're like, well, maybe I should just stop trying to be a high performer, right? But I can tell that that's actually who you are. That's who you want to be. What you don't want is the frustration and the anxiety that comes. That has been coming.
Motivation.
Right, and the motivation.
Well, the motivation as a high performer is a good thing.
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
But it's finding that balance.
Finding that balance, absolutely. So we have a lot of anxiety. I mean, you know, we ended up adding it to the middle piece, right? And I think anxiety comes up anytime you're triggered to this performance thing. Let's talk about this thought here. And I see this so common in women. Like, I don't know that I've met a woman that doesn't have that, at least a little bit.
Sure.
In that negative thought, the you know, not good enough and kind of that performing, and so, you know, when I can get the external validation, I feel good about it, but you know, kind of that constant fight for that. On a scale of 1 to 10, where would you say, 10 being I truly believe I'm not good enough. 0, I'm kind of narcissistic. Where would you be on that scale?
I guess it depends on what topic.
Or what day,
yeah,
right?
Or what day.
Or what day, for sure. But let's just say like a general, because, you know, I have the same things. I have, you know, bad days where, you know, I'd be a 4 or 5, and then, you know, really bad days might be as high as a 7, right? But my average was probably a 4 type thing.
Sorry, so 10 is...
like you really don't think you're good enough.
Oh, okay. I think at my core, I believe that I am. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's situational.
Right.
That brings that number up.
So a lot of triggers, you know, anytime something triggers that, you know, kind of maybe directly related to a goal, do you think it's directly related to a goal? Because it could also be related to control.
Yes.
But I think you'd like to give up control if you could, if you could trust the other people, right?
Right. Yes.
Two entrepreneurs talking to each other. I think we're like right on the same track.
I'm all for teamwork. Like I've always worked well in group settings.
Yeah.
So I have no problem trusting other people, but when it doesn't happen to my standards, then
so goal, or, you know, even putting it here, you know, when something indicates that you're not high performing.
Yes.
Would you say that would be the trigger?
Yes.
Okay.
Or how the other factors reflect on me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, especially in business, it doesn't matter what happened behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. I'm the one ultimately responsible.
And you're also the one ultimately responsible for this feeling that's exhausting you. Okay?
Yeah.
And so we're going to talk a little bit about how to manage that. We didn't really have much around trauma or grief or any of these. Maybe a little bit. You know, the category is called spiritual conflict. I don't think it's a spiritual conflict for you. I think it's more of, you know, you want the time to grow in that area and you just don't have it.
Yes, or not prioritizing it. Mm-hmm. I think it's easy to say, you know, there's so many like self-help books of like, take 5 minutes before you get out of bed. That's just has not been my choice.
But, you know, in your defense, I will say everybody has like a thing, but it would only take 10 minutes. But if I did everybody's 10 minutes, that it would be my whole day, right? Right. You know, if you did, you know, 10 minutes in a sauna, if you did, you know, exercise, if you did meditation, you know. And so it's easier to react to our environment than to, you know, put the time aside for those things. But you will eventually.
Find your
but I don't think that's the core thing going on here.
Okay.
I think the core thing is anxiety related to performance. Okay. Would you agree?
Sure.
Okay. So what we do next is we organize it so that when we're making choices, it's in line with the specific thing instead of, so, you know, we think of that thought map and it's kind of all over the place and everything's connected and it's disorganized. And we read a self-help book and it says, oh, just think positive and, you know, say positive things to yourself, right? Yeah. That's great for, you know, your thing where you kind of think you're not good enough, right? Uh-huh. So all of that positive psychology and the positive self-talk, that works here. Oh.
Zero self-talk.
But I think this is what's missing in the industry. It's like, that's great. Those are all great techniques. Sure. But they're only going to help your negative thoughts. Yep. They're not going to actually stop your anxiety. Uh-huh. So you had trouble rating the negative thought. And I think I do the same thing too, because we are so successful. Like, we have it together. It's not really that big of a deal. I know I'm good enough. Yeah. But what about that anxiety? And specifically time spent. If a 10 is an exhausting amount of time on this frustration and anxiety, and 0 is I'm never anxious, where would you be?
8. But also I'm action oriented, so I will use, okay, what am I feeling anxious about today? What is the critical need? And trying to get answers, trying to move what's stuck forward. So that time turns into not just sitting there worrying about it, but actually trying to do something, but then getting frustrated if it doesn't get fixed.
Right, because I'm a high performer and I should be able to, take care of my anxiety. Yeah. One of the things that I always like to talk about when it comes to anxiety is that it's a continuum. So if we drew a line here, and I'm going to move this all the way over, and this is mild anxiety. This is moderate, right? Like a 3 to an 8. Call this one an 8, 3. And this is panic, right? You're starting to have physical symptoms of that anxiety. Oftentimes when we're in the midst of that, we're like trying to get to 0 in the anxiety, like stop being anxious.
Yeah.
And if you could just move over 2 or 3 points, it would be so much more manageable.
Sure.
Right? And the mild anxiety, this provides performance. So for example, if you had a test coming and you were in college, you had a test coming and you studied for that test, and your anxiety caused you to study for that test.
Sure.
Mild anxiety is going to allow you to study very well.
Yeah.
And moderate anxiety is going to start getting in the way of your memory. Panic does not, right? And so this area is impacting your decision making. You're action oriented, so you are often like finding a solution, but it takes a lot of time and energy.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you find yourself kind of in the same loops?
Yeah, trying to decide where the right solution is.
So you have some decision fatigue.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a right decision all the time?
No. And being vulnerable enough to say, I don't know.
Okay.
Or I'm trying.
Right. So what kind of techniques could you use? Because you're, probably at a 7, 8 when something is triggering that anxiety. When there's a decision to be made, there's performance, all of the stress of what we talked about, right? Making sure everyone gets paid and those kinds of things all come up behind that decision.
Yeah.
And what we want to do here is kind of separate those things, right? Those are, choices, right? You want to be a high performer. You want to be an entrepreneur. So these are, I can't spell entrepreneur, but
that's okay.
So you want those things, right? It's not something you want to get rid of,
sure,
right?
Yes.
So this is what we have to try to control, because this is not going to change.
Right.
Whatever the decision is today, it will be, something else tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day, and you're going to get burnt out.
Yeah. If
you can't make a choice to, one, separate these things, right? Because being a business owner is a decision. So you're consciously taking on that responsibility, even though that responsibility is causing you anxiety. So like kind of owning that as a decision that you made, and not letting it come up every time there's a new decision, right? Because because this is what happens to our brain. Anxiety, and then boom, some sort of decision, boom, everything comes up instead of just that decision, right? That the specific anxiety around that decision. So, another department, somebody calls you, there's something going on. What happens and what causes this flow of emotion is that all of this is coming up, but really, how do we isolate it? How do we function sometimes like a man's brain, like in a box, right? Like, here's my decision. It's not, it doesn't impact everything, right? But sometimes it feels like it does. I mean, we call this rumination, right? We go, I make the wrong decision at work, right? And then, it goes to literally every wrong decision I've made in my entire life, including, times of being a mom and things like that. And so what we have to learn how to do is separate those things. So, so kind of owning that decision and separating. Oh my goodness. Okay. And then, okay, it's not being nice to you, sorry. What are some other things that you could do mentally to separate?
Location, like separating work, home.
Compartmentalizing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Driving even.
Okay.
So compartmentalizing not just in my mind, but in the
physical
location,
right? Because
to
sometimes
allow my brain to switch between those locations appropriately.
And then also identifying your triggers, because I think if we don't recognize things as a trigger, we easily get back to all those bubbles, right?
Sure.
And you could just say, next time something happens and you start to feel that, you're like, oh, no, this is just a trigger, right? It doesn't mean I'm not good enough, right? Is there anything else that maybe is a core belief that kind of digs deep? We call our core connections are like that button that we talk about. Like, somebody's pushing this button or a situation pushes this kind of button in me that creates all of those emotional connections to everything.
It's hard to identify.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it is, your negative thought is the same as your core connection.
Okay.
But sometimes it's not. And the difference is that a negative thought can easily just, that, like, for example, I might say in a bad moment, I'm not a good mom, but I know I'm a good mom. Like,
right.
Like I can quickly, I know it's not real. I know it's not true. For me, not good enough goes all the way to the core, I'm so performance, and if I'm not getting the external validation. And so that is a button for me.
Or being misunderstood as not good enough, or me misunderstanding a complaint or a task or a need of someone else.
Yeah.
And taking that personally.
Yeah. I can tell just by the emotion that's coming up that is a core connection for you.
Yeah. So that misunderstood of both ways, or how that person's relating their need and a decision that I have to make to be as a whole.
Right.
Like, is that reflecting on me personally and my intentions?
Okay. Yeah. That is the actual trigger when, performance, but that being misunderstood. So any situation, this is kind of your button, right? It's that turns the emotional faucet on, right? Like it's like, so what can you do in an actual moment? Because now you can identify it pretty quickly. What can you do in that very moment to cut these ties, right? Because not everything is all of that stuff, right?
So pausing, taking time so that I'm not on the defensive, trying to explain all of the factors that go into that issue, or deflecting it to other, it's easy to say, oh, it's the other departments, it's all these other factors, but also recognizing my responsibility in that. So for good, better or for worse,
right.
There is still, I need to be truthful with myself about what my role is in that.
Yeah. And do you psychoanalyze yourself in every encounter like that? Like, you know, what is my intention? What do they think my intention is? Are you constantly in the background doing that?
Maybe more than I know.
Because it does keep coming up. Like you really do care a lot about what people think, but you also care to make sure that you are showing that you care.
Yeah.
And that's a lot. It's a lot of responsibility on you because we can't control other people.
Sure. Yeah.
What does it mean when I say that? Like, does that resonate with you? Does it allow you to let go of some of that?
I think that responsibility will always be there.
So you're going to take it on, even though it's exhausting for you, because that's a choice.
Yeah. Right.
It's a choice to continue to feel responsible for really subconscious exchange of energy is what you're taking. You're not even taking on the direct. You're taking on kind of the subconscious, the deeper.
Or, trying to find the deeper meaning. What are they not saying? Mm-hmm. That is something that is something to work on for sure. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we talked about, like, do you want to do that or do you want to let that go? Or do you want to only do it
when it's useful?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And maybe prioritizing the relationships where it's important.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Like your spouse, your kids, you know, it's important what they think, right? Yes. You know, your employees to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But then their patients and then the billing department and, you know, like,
yes.
You know, at some point you have to be like, their opinion doesn't matter. Like
yes.
Where are you right now where you could draw a line? If we made a circle and this is, you know, your closest family, right? And then another circle of, like, you know, closest friends, maybe even some work friends, right? Or work colleagues.
Uh-huh.
At what point, where are you willing to draw a line?
Friends are not a drain to me.
Mm-hmm.
I have plenty of social opportunities, but also like it could be more. Like I'm doing better about saying no to free up just free time. Mm-hmm. So I don't.
But I'm
feel
talking
like
not just like task responsibilities.
Sure.
What I see is going on with you is the emotional exhaustion about pleasing everyone, regardless, every interaction.
Sure.
Right? You probably are super nice to the cashier and you don't want her to think you're a nice person, right?
Sure.
Which kindness is good. I'm not saying you stop being kind. But when anybody triggers that misunderstanding your intention,
right.
whether it's a complete stranger, it creates...
And not to think about that. Let it ruminate.
Right. Well, what it does is it blows up that whole map, right? Like, you know, this one little interaction, you call the billing department, they don't understand what you're saying, you know you need to be kind of businessy and stern, but you don't want to, and then you're constantly analyzing that whole interaction. And it's exhausting. You're going to burn out.
Right.
If you don't, like, draw a line of where it's important, of what people think and where it's not.
I get that. I hear what you're saying.
Okay.
I'm having trouble verbalizing where to draw the line.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, sometimes we go through a process like this and then, like, we literally have to go home and download, you know. And this anxiety and worry to be at a reasonable level. And it's causing a lot of emotional stuff and just exhaustion. And I want, you know, to be a successful business person, we have to endure.
Having that resilience.
I
get it.
To keep going, because the problems are not going to stop.
Sure. Yeah. And being able to have the calmness and the presence of mind to be able to handle them.
So is that something that, so when we were here on the personal vision, we talked about the type of leader that you wanted to be. But what about the type of person? Yeah. Like you're very anxious, but then you just use the word peaceful and calm. Uh-huh. Where would you like to be peaceful and calm? Okay. Right. And your anxiety is a barrier to that. And you're going to work on that. What I like to do when I'm doing personal visions and stuff is, what can you do right now to get to this, to be working towards that place, right? We're never going to be completely peaceful and calm, right? Because, you know, you and I both, we enjoy being high performers, but we'd like to be ones that are not about to burn out.
Definitely.
That we can find our peaceful and calm, and that we can continue to be a high performer with, you know, in that peaceful and calm state. Because sometimes the fear is that if we're peaceful and calm, we won't be a high performer.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
But it's not true. You can be a high performer and be peaceful and calm.
I think pausing and so being an active listener in the moment without trying to come up with a solution immediately. So giving space between to give myself time to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
And not having to be as so fast-paced.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we've brought up enough today.
Yes.
Like, what are 3 things that you learned going through this process?
Even just naming the type of leader that I want to be, I think is helpful. Okay. Because it's giving me language that maybe I didn't, I came quickly to those words, but didn't maybe haven't exactly verbalized to myself before. So having that presence of mind of where I want to be, and honestly, even putting a name to the anxiety. Yeah. So I think that that's something that I've brushed under the rug.
Right. Well, you've always I've always been like this, right? And and I'm successful at it.
A+ for anxiety.
Right. Well, you know, it does drive you, you know, and but it can also burn you out and exhaust you. So I think you have some things to download, and we all have things to work on forever. Yes. I've been doing this on myself for over 20 years. We just you know, there's times I still have to map myself. Most of the time I can do it in my head now because I'm like, there's my core connection again, you know, type thing. But so the more you do it, the easier it is to just do it on the fly. But sometimes when it goes deep, I have to get out the map and figure it out again. Yeah.
Well, really helpful tools. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah. Thank you for being vulnerable. I know it's hard.